have 26 contact events. I'm public about that. I know they're real. I passed a lie detector test. I have videos of UAP. Polygraph was actually done by a detective, and he asked really basic, straight questions. Were you abducted by aliens? I have several researchers who've done deep dives on my content. They vouch for me publicly. This is important for people to understand. Just knowing that this information is real, the idea that this could be possible, humans need to know that this can happen to someone.
Hey, Jeff, thank you so much for being here with me today. I've really been looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, you got it, David. Thank you for having me.
In 1997, you had a transformative experience that led you to leave your life as an investment banker and begin this journey of self-discovery. Can you walk us through what happened?
The story is a bit complex. So, in summary, I made an agreement with gray aliens to discover my soul. So that's the gist of it. The story, how that occurs, is very complex on their behalf, actually. Much more complex than I think the human race right now is willing to understand. It started in, now I had childhood contact events, and that's where it all kind of starts. And during those contact events, I wasn't really aware of what was going on. And some of those events have been posted online, and now they can be sifted through by people. And what's obvious to me is that they were kind of selecting and choosing. There was other children there, and they were selecting and choosing. And I guess I made a cut or something for their ideas. And when I was 16, they came back. So there was kind of a bit of a gap where I didn't have any childhood contact events. Now, by the way, all of this was occurring without my knowledge. So it's not like I understood that this was happening to me. And the way they obscure these memories is very bizarre. I have been spending the last several months trying to understand this more. I used to think it happened in the physical tissue brain. I don't believe that anymore. I believe the entities can stop time, and I believe that timelessness is a part of the human consciousness. And so when they're doing something like outside of time, we're operating in a different spot of our own consciousness. And then when you aren't maybe apt to looking at that space within yourself, you actually can't see it. An example to that I use is now NDEs, near-death experiences, where people also can have obscured memories from their near-death experiences. And like there's a transitioning of consciousness, or kind of phasing of consciousness that can go on here. And they seem to master this type of stuff. So like they're using tech, and so it's as if they can control things. And but that's just a point to say that I had no knowledge I was having alien contact. There was no peripheral. There were weird events, but I didn't know to link them to alien contact. So it really did hide itself in my life. And then the memories would come out at the age of 41. And so kind of this really strange scenario. And then all my contact events. Sorry, I'm backing up, but I really want to point out as I talk about the obscured memory part and how this all occurred that I passed a lie detector test. I have videos of UAP. I have several researchers who've done deep dives on my content, and they speak publicly on my behalf, not speaking publicly on my behalf, but they vouch for me. Yeah, they vouch for me publicly. And so that being said, this is all very real. And so what they did, they came back at the age of 16. And at 16, I was questioning my own existence and my own life at the time. And I was walking home from hanging out with friends, and I was on a old junior high school. Even for myself at that time, I was in high school, but I was walking across my old junior high in the middle of the night. And it was quite dark by a forest that does actually tend to have some weird activity, paranormal stuff going on. And so this was in a weird area in my own neighborhood growing up in Coquitlam, BC. And I'm walking across a field, and the alien literally comes down. And at the time, I thought I was frozen by tech. And not at the time, I didn't understand anything. But memories, years later, I thought I was frozen by tech. I'm now actually convinced that was time. I'm frozen in time. I'm trying to run away. and the alien's trying to get my attention and like, come with us to our ship. Like it's trying to get my permission. So it's come with us to our ship. We'll bring you right back. It's basically saying. And in that moment, it's so weird, but the past memories open up of the childhood contact events. So whatever going on here with the state of consciousness, it's a recurring state of consciousness while you're in contact with them. So I'm aware of the previous contact events, even though this guy never knows any of it's happening. When I'm with them, all the previous stuff opens up. So it's a very weird thing, and I hadn't had any interactions with them for over 10 years, or over 10 years and a bit. And so I'm freaking out, as anyone would, and having panic. But there is an element of, why is this familiar to me? And then the entity itself is letting me kind of remember, as if it maybe was jarring the memory. I really don't know, but as if, like, and there's moments on craft when I'm like a young kid, and I'm safe, and the entities aren't harmful to me. And so it's kind of reminding me of that. Like, hey, you've been with us before, and we've shown you that we're safe. And when I put that together, I'm actually staring at the entity and looking at it, and their eyes are really weird. These gray alien type things. They're black, right? These eyes are very mystical and really compelling. And I agree. And basically, it's a long story, but to summarize, inside, I agree. Basically, they're interested in my future. There's a timeline, and these guys can see the future or some version of it. And there's a timeline, and though it's abstract information, she's explaining this gray alien's a female. She's explaining, we're interested in this, and would you want to work with us? And here's the deal: we help you discover your soul, and by doing that, this will, launch you. You'll end up leaving your world, and we'll be able to study you. So we'll help you discover your soul. That will end up making you travel or leave your society, and then we'll end up studying you. And I didn't really understand any of that at the time, but there was another element that, as I'd said, I kind of felt like something was different about me. So, well, there's the ones answering that in the moment. So here I am as a 16-year-old questioning my existence. Why do I feel like I'm a little bit different? And I had a learning disability at the time, and I was highly creative, super intelligent, creative, but not really good academically. And so I kind of was questioning my existence, and, as probably a normal teenager would. And then here they are answering things. They're saying that part of you is us. So they're saying I have their DNA, and they kind of explain some of this detail. And that answering felt right. It actually answered things in my life. And there was some degree that they felt that I was one of theirs. That's how they framed it. So with that, you actually kind of say, okay, well, this is interesting then. And you do get to the state where you're like, I guess this is beyond my parents. It's beyond anyone understanding this. And you agree. I agreed. And I didn't know what I was getting into. And now here's the real truth. I'll end up learning that I actually agreed to this entire thing in the afterlife. And they just needed this guy's brain to also agree. So I was at least aware that this agreement was here, and that I was working with them. So they get that agreement from me. And then there is a physical procedure. And then after that, they actually, they do it here in this first contact event when I'm 16 years old. They show me my soul is what they do. And then they'll obscure it from the everyday me. Now, so what they do is they take me into a dimensional room. A white room is what I call it. And there does seem to be other contactees who have had similar types of experiences in a very, very similar type of room. When you walk in, it is pure white, and it's dimensionless almost. Like it kind of extends out in football fields length of distance. And yet you're in a craft. So it really is a weird paradox. And it's also extending underneath you. So you feel like you're kind of walking on air. And these descriptions have been repeated by Susie Hansen, who was in a very similar room and saw similar activity that happened to me. Linda Porter from Linda Moulton Howe's investigations seems to be in a similar type of space, and she called it a soul transfer room. So this is a real deal stuff. And so I get into this space, And the main gray alien I'm dealing with steps forward and says to me, what's going to happen is going to be beyond your comprehension. We all start floating, and I'm not one that I'm panicking, but I'm in a state of shock and awe. Let's put it that way. That's what it is: shock and awe. And my body seems to phase out, and my ethereal energy is what's left. The ghost me. We don't have too many words for this understanding. I guess ethereal body for those who understand it, and it collapses. So it basically forms itself into an orb. Now I don't do that. Something in the tech or the environment does it to me, and it happens to them also. So we're all orbs. The equivalent I have for understanding this is a Kundalini rising, though I actually argue that that's still a fragment or some fraction of what this actually is. Sorry, one sec. Clearing my throat. And it was bliss, utter bliss. I don't know that we have this yet, and it was like a rush, a bliss rush. There just isn't any other words, and it completed. You have a sense of completion in it, and you're linked. So there was this field link with the room and with the entities in it, and so sameness. Like I'm the same thing that they are. When you're linked in unity, you feel the consistency, the sameness, the similarity. Everything about me is them as well. Yet I am individuated. I'm linked, and that I know I am them. And I was laughing without having a body to laugh with. I was trying to stand with having no body to stand with, and it was just feeling like utter bliss and joy. And they started to whip around, and I started to. I learned I could, with thought, basically, you can very easily move around in this environment. And then there was a bit of a game where we spun with each other, and it felt really, really blissful. Unity, have a feeling with them. And that lasted, I don't know, maybe 5-10 minutes, I don't know. And then so the main alien I was with basically stops, and she turns herself into a portal. Now, this is like, it just goes down to high strangeness. Like, how do you like? I'm really grateful people listen, but it's not like we all understand this stuff, right? And she turns herself into a portal, and so she's like, "Come in." It's like a vibration or feeling like to come in. And I slowly am moving into this portal. And there's a real clear feeling that this is going to be something outside of my frame of reference of reality. Not that this wasn't already, but we're going deeper into this strangeness. And then it's basically, as I'm into this space, it's pure blackness. And there's a dead body to my left. So this paradox right away, right? Bliss, love, unity, and now I'm looking at death. So it really sticks in the mind of the memory. That's one of them. But so there's this dead body, and it's this blackness, but this kind of like body lit up. And then over top of the dead body is a sparkling energy. Now I'm having an immediate shared experience with this, and I know it's my past life. Now, even more paradoxical is it feels present moment. So it feels like it's something that's happening right now, while simultaneously being something that I can feel is in the past. So it's got a weird bending of time or paradox of time. And I actually say, it's me. I'm alive. I've been alive. And there's this real clear sensation of it's me now, as in I'm in these other forms, and it's also the past. So I've been alive. And what it is it's a death of a last life, my last life. I actually have this information now. The time I didn't. At 16 years old, I didn't. And it was a Jewish person in a Holocaust and concentration camp, like the worst type of struggle to the death that you can imagine. Like it probably would have been recorded. And that sparkling energy is crying, actually. So there is like sadness for its death. So it's crying, and then it starts moving up, and I can feel all the feelings. So everything's clear. It's me, and all these. It's moving up, and the sparkling energy is moving up as it's crying. So it's going somewhere, and as it's moving up, moving up, moving up, it hits a veil. There's like a veil, like a barrier of some kind, and it passes through. And when it passes through, it transforms. And it transforms into a man with a beard and a white flowing gown. And there is an impression that this entity wants me to watch this and somehow maybe is putting a telepathic imprint of this simplified image over top of maybe what actually this really is, which is a dimensional. I'll end up only knowing it as the higher self, and 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 I will understand this thing to be my intuitive self fully personified. So it's like a fragment of me. Like so, the higher self is just it's a 10% of me, right? I'm a full-blooded brain and body, mind, Jeff Selver. We're all our identities, and that thing is much huger than we have an identity for. And it's not developing the identity I am. I am my own identity, but it's this fragment, and so it blows out into this full body me that's not me but is me kind of thing. And then very quickly a gray alien. So first off, it's not affected by the past. There's a very distinct feeling of like, oh yeah, that. So this past life suffered, and then now there's this. I'm not suffering at all. So it's kind of completed. It has, and I call it a dissemination of knowledge of what it really was. So it's kind of like unaffected by what happened, knowing what it really is. It was a really like a detachment. A gray alien approaches my higher self, like right as soon as it comes into this new realm. And then there's a communication, and it's pretty crazy. Like I'm kind of looking through a veil, as if this is all happening in outer space, and then the afterlife is like a light dimension that you can't see is in space, but I was a third person vantage looking as if I'm looking through a veil, and then there's this communication going on between my higher self that I identify with and this gray alien. And the communication is a little bit obscured, but it's understanding that it's looking for help. Like it's looking, hey, do you want to work with us? And so my higher self is on that spot interacting with the gray alien very quickly. And then what happens is kind of like Photoshop, right? It's like as if this tech is so advanced, whatever is going on in front of me, and I can only imagine it's holograms, but with shared experience. So it's a hologram with a real lived shared experience, so you can feel all the impressions of what you're watching. And it's so advanced that they take out information that they don't need you to see, maybe don't want you to see, but specifically don't need you to see, and then they slice it to make it a nice perfect film almost, right? So there ends up being scenes. So it's like, okay, we'll show him this, we'll show him that, and we'll show him this. So it ends up being scenes kind of all spliced together like a Photoshop. So it's photoshopped afterlife, real events going on here. So advanced, so advanced. And so the next scene is my higher self is watching gray aliens from coming up from Earth. And it seems to be implying something, that there was a communication with humans, and that humans made a choice. And my higher self was waiting for that choice to be made before it really committed to the building of me. So it wasn't making a choice about the life I would have. It would create of me. So the higher self, part of this I learned is that it's the creator of me. It's the one intelligently creating my life. And so it's waiting for that moment to occur, and then it chooses what to do. And once that they come up, they kind of almost communicate to this realm. These gray aliens are communicating to this afterlife realm that humans made this choice. And now there's a guarantee of how the next decades would turn out. And then my higher self starts making its plans to build me. Then there's another scene, and my higher self is in a room with a grid. It's like a grid system. And they're basically like nodes with like lines connecting to other nodes. And then my higher self could go into the node, and it pulls open, and then there's like soul groupings, soul bodies. Like I guess not just the physical bodies that you would link with, but the souls that you love to incarnate with. And then I guess it's a planned out life. And the idea was it was showing how it interacted with the population. And this was a gray alien DNA version. So bodies that have gray alien DNA on the planet, and it was mapping and tracking them all. And then you could literally go in and look at the soul groupings within those bodies. What's fascinating, just a quick aside, is Michael. I've been doing recent research on all this stuff now, NDEs and mid and between life regressions, and Michael Newton actually has his own deep research on soul groups, and his description is very aptly similar to mine, where of what I witnessed that there's these groups, there's these nodes. He calls them lily pads, which is very similar, and then you would go into them, and then there's secondary groups, and then there's primary groups. The primary groups being, we could probably all identify a primary soul group of our member, like a member of our primary group, our loved ones, right? Very easily, just our loved ones, right? So that's powerful, and that's what I'm witnessing. And I had that memory for a long time before I knew that research. That part ends, and basically there's a transference going on, and this is in part what's happening. The Great Alien said to me, "They'll help you discover your soul." So what they're doing is my orb 16-year-old self is watching this, and it's absorbing the higher self. So it really is an entrainment, right? The idea that there's an energy entrainment, that when you put a higher vibration thing with a lower vibration thing, then that lower vibration will start matching the higher vibration. And same
Right.
thing. So my orb was absorbing the higher self. So they were giving me an agreement to discover my soul. What's your soul but your higher self? So my orb is basically becoming the embodiment of the higher self by watching a past event of it, basically. So I'm having all this transference of information. I'm aware the higher self can have multiple offshoots. So I was aware while it's doing all this work, it's got other parts of it firing off into other dimensions, other realms. It's doing maybe there could have been 7, 8, or 10 versions of it doing things. So it's got this multi-body faceted awareness in the afterlife realm, doing things in Jupiter while going into another dimension and exploring things. And so it's got this multi thing going on. The other was that some of those realms had structures. It's a really weird game going on here that I think we imagine in our human world that, in the afterlife, it's probably all etheric energy and you're just a floating gaseous thing. No, there's structures. How? I don't know how, but the idea that there's buildings and rooms and things you go into, that's very weird. And yet that's what I witnessed. Turns out when I was doing my research, other people witnessed structures as well too in the afterlife. A third was, and it becomes very critical in understanding some of the phenomenon years later, but I witnessed that in where those structures were, my 16-year-old self comprehended that there was empty space in the universe there. So there's like a dimensional space that you can't see for the human eyes, but when you look with the human eyes, it's just like void of galaxies and stars, just empty void space. Yet for the ethereal entities, there's a whole dimensional realms there. And what that came with that understanding was that the universe was made of layers of lands. Was how I interpret that, this kind of download, layers of dimensional spaces stacked on top of one another. And again, also in my research, I'll end up finding out that yes, people actually see layers. I guess astral layers is what they are, but they're layers. The universe is filled with these kind of stacked up layers that are all layered on top of one another. And so I didn't have any of that knowledge for the longest time until this research recently. And so all this experience, and then what cuts to the next scene, kind of the last scene, and my higher self has chosen to build me. It's like it figured it out, knows the family, knows the life, and he's in a room with the main gray alien I'll deal with. So now my higher self is more of this full body thing, and it's actually on a craft. Like I can't wrap my head around it. That an alien craft could contain a higher self, but that is what this is. And there's a table, so it's more procedural. And then my higher self is there, and it expels out me. So it's like a cocoon. It's like the plan of what I'll become. Now, interestingly, it's like 20-year-old me. So it's as if my physical tissue body growing up all the years will kind of try to match this thing when it hits the 20s, and it's kind of a weird thing, but it was the 20-year-old me, the early 20s, like 22 or something, and it's the physical tissue body, so it already has the outline of what I'll look like and become. And then the gray alien that's there is the main gray alien I'll deal with. She floats an ethereal body out of her physical body and overlays it over top. Now there's a whole phenomenon in the UFO field called the dual soul, and it's why I've connected with Susie Hansen, the author, who is the author of the Dual Soul Connection. John Mack talked about it as the alien identity within the human. Joel Nyman also knew of it, called the dual reference. The idea that there's this human and alien part to contactees, and what Susie Hansen has in her research, and what I am witnessing here, is it's actually not a psychological effect, but an actual real physical procedure the aliens do to the ethereal body of the human being before it gets put into birth. So they're actually embedding a dual soul into the ethereal body. The reason they might do this is because a part of an experiment, so they're actually wanting to learn about it from the inside. But it's wacky. It's really far out, and yet it's very real, and it becomes a part of my lived experience in the present. And so yeah, that entity puts her energy over top of that ethereal body, and then that's it. This next scene is I'm a blue orb, like the Jeff Selver is a blue orb being placed into the womb of my mother, and then the scene ends. I'm actually expelled out from the dimensional portal, and when I do, my body's reformed, and I feel the higher self energy. Like I'm transformed. That's it. I'm altered and transformed. And yeah, they'll basically, there's a whole other bunch of stuff here, but the bottom line is they'll end up sealing this up. And I will have felt like I touched God that night. As I walked through the field, I end up having a crazy dream where I'm floating above that very field that night. I'll have the dream and I'll feel a deep sense of mysticism. I can translate that now to having touched God, but then having been veiled up from me. So then it leaves whoa, what was that? And it ends up, it's a dream, and it ends up turning into the dream where I'm floating over the field. And it's because of how the aliens pulled me up from the field. And so there's like imprints of it. And it makes sense that there would be a dream because my conscious mind does have to grab onto something. And then, but it's kind of like my higher self knows there's a big plan. We're going to deal with this later. So then as a teenager, I record this information, the dream that I had that night. And I'm left perplexed, and I feel like I touched something, but I don't understand it. And then I'm like, okay, I'll live with my normal life. And I don't understand what that was. And then there's like a plan to utilize that. And that is what you talked about earlier in 1997. That plan will kind of be initiated. It's actually 4 years. So it's really complex what the aliens did here. And they utilized an event in 1993, walking home. So it's just obscured, and I'll never notice it until all the memories come and crack open, 20 years something later.
Okay, yeah, wow, you said a lot. There's so
Yeah.
much amazing stuff there, and it
Yeah,
is a
it's
little
huge.
hard to wrap our 3D brain around because it's
Right.
just so different.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, so different. Yeah.
so you said you didn't remember these experiences until you were 40, right, or 40 something years old.
41, yeah. 41, yeah.
41. Help us understand as the audience, how do you know that these were real experiences and not something that your mind has just
Yeah.
created, your imagination?
Yeah.
My other question is, and I can ask this later, but I just don't want to forget, is you said you had a polygraph. Why did you have that done, and who performed that?
Yeah, sure. So, okay, so two questions. Let's go to the polygraph first. Polygraph is actually done by detective here in Vancouver. I hired him, so I paid for his services, and he was just a detective. And there's actually no really way to do a polygraph. I called the police. That was the first person I called, saying, "Hey, I had this crazy event. Do you do polygraphs?" And they're like, "No, unless there's a crime, we're not interested in doing that." And so I had to seek out a private detective, and he's a licensed. He was actually part of the South African police force, and he has several credentials. There's like a South African credential, and there's international credentials for those who know this stuff. All that's actually linked on my website, so you can actually, it's all very transparent. You can actually see the polygraph directly, and you can see the credentials of him. I don't list him for his own privacy, who he actually is, but of course, if someone ever detective worked with me, I could definitely give that information to someone. But all the credentials are actually listed on my website directly because, yeah, to be transparent. And yeah, and he asked really basic, straight questions. Were you abducted by aliens? Right, and I really used basic, straight questions in that process, and the answers come out straight yes. So yeah, yeah, that's the first one. So the lie detector test. The why did I do it? Because I know I wouldn't believe me because I'm a skeptic, and because these stories are nuts. Sorry, though that doesn't offend anybody, but they're too far out, and I know they're real. So this is important for people to understand, especially now that we're moving towards towards the phenomenon, and it's clearly disclosures are clearly occurring. Just understanding, just knowing that this information is real, the idea that this could be possible, that aliens are first in the afterlife, that they could do this to a person. These are things that I think, for my personal drive, humans need to know that this can happen to someone, and that the people are dealing with the phenomenon. They have all these interpretations and mythologies that they're running off of, and yet I have a unique perspective, and my perspective is matching. I've been around for several years now, and this information is all matching up. It's all aligning, and we now have. I was public with this before we now had both Ross Coulthert, the journalist, part of this UAP disclosure, and same with Bob Bigelow, both claiming the phenomenon is linked to the afterlife. So that's huge. That's like, this is me feeling, okay, great, we're understanding that, and I've been very public about this. That I saw the gray aliens in the afterlife. So this is really, really, really huge. Why I would do that? So it helps lend to this understanding as we're moving into disclosure. That's the one. So the other is what's the evidence that this happened to me? Of course, I can't provide evidence for it because it's my personal story. But there are some fascinating things that people don't quite get now. There are multiple databases on the phenomenon that people have now been recording for decades, straight over to 100 years. So we have UFO sightings mapped all throughout BC here. We have other weird paranormal phenomenon going on too. We have missing 411. We have ghost sightings. All this stuff is now documented, right, and put into databases or books from the case of missing 411. And not just that, but the way the aliens interact with people, the way they behave, what happens to the contactee. There's so much documentation, and it's what's also really unclear is that the documentation exists and you're exposed to it after you go public, because you can't just Google some of this stuff. It's actually really fascinating. You actually have to do the hard digging research. So now let me tell you some weird crossovers with just this single contact event. All of mine, I have 26 contact events. I'm public about that. So I've got 26 of them. And all of them have crossovers that are perplexing and bizarre, locations where other people experience similar things to me. So, and in this case, the craft I report is, now I've reported this 2020 was the very first day I went public with this contact event. There's a full video on my YouTube channel. And so and there was a researcher there that day. And I witnessed a V-shaped craft over top of the field. Well, what the hell is with another person witnessing a very similar craft in the exact spot in 2014? I would discover that in the UFO BC database. That there was a weird sighting in the exact corner roads of Como Lake and Mariner Way, right at the corner where this junior high school was, in the same vicinity, the corner of the Mundy Park where that park is. So the area has weird phenomenon, and someone report such a strangely, oddly similar craft, black with the circular lights, massive. So that doesn't make any sense. What's with that craziness? When the memories were coming out too, the behavior of the aliens is just unique, right? Looking into the eyes and having all communication come from the eyes. I actually get panicked when I'm interacting with her, and then she has me drawn to her eyes, and I start calming down and can actually communicate with her. So there's these very subtle aspects of the story that are matching up. Another. So when I come into the craft, it will be her, and then these four tiny little guys. So she's like 4 foot tall, and then there's these like 3.5 foot tall ones. So she's kind of like got an entourage. I'll never experience this ever again. So I'll only experience one moment where she's kind of introducing herself, and she has these four little ones. Well, this is I eventually learned in the databases, some kind of experiencer database, that people kind of jokingly call it the gray alien entourage. Yeah, that there's actually, when you're it's almost like they have a custom, like a social custom of some kind, that when they introduce themselves, there's this tall one and the small ones. And another example of that would be the Betty Andreessen case, where you have a tall one and then it's surrounded by these small ones, and the tall one's the one communicating with you. And it's a weird like custom of theirs or something, I don't know. And so there's plethora, especially this contact event. Uh, just the way, just there's so many tiny details. The timeline that I saw. Never mind that too. The effects that this stuff had on me become real effects in my everyday life, and that's the big key that can't be denied. That a lot of the researchers behind this stuff understand that it affects you personally. And so it becomes a resolution for me. Getting the memories out resolved what happened to me. And so it's so real for me because it is real. It did happen. And then having those memories, every single one of them, the first, third, 10th, 20th, doesn't matter what contact event, had links to other aspects of the phenomenon that I would eventually learn about over my years of going public. And what's happening now is the more public I am, I'm getting contactees and experiencers reaching out to me saying, I had an event like that, or I had this event that in your fourth contact event that's like mine, or I had this other event that's like mine. So people are having, all these other types of very similar contact events, and mine seems to be this condensed version of it. And so I don't know that that could ever quell someone, but it is pretty unique what happened to me. And yet, oh, and the other thing, right? The room that I was into, the dimensional space, like you can't make up the effects and how crazy it is that Susie Hansen would be in the exact same room that I was in. That she would actually see orbs, so she wasn't turned into an orb, but she was in a white room that was massive, got turned into an orb, and then they spun. And I was an orb that did get spun, but she witnessed the spinning of the orbs. And they explain the purpose of the room. To me, they don't explain it. I'm the guinea pig in my contact events. So you have these link ups that are beyond. There's either all a collective psychosis going on, or we are all actually interacting with a phenomenon that keeps itself very quiet from the human perspective. And the reason they might do that is because they're interacting in these very high dimensional ways that could be very hard to comprehend, or just too much for the human brain. And so they have to meter things out. And that's kind of what it looks like is going on, is maybe a decades long metering out of information. So
How did all of these memories unlock for you? Because
yeah,
you didn't remember them when you were 16. You didn't remember having this experience when they
yeah,
were happening.
yeah,
So how did it all unfold?
yeah. So the actual day, you could say, it was actually a contact event. So 2016 was my 25th contact event. And so I'm, I don't know, 30. I'm 30. I'm late 30s at that time, and 38 maybe. And it was here, right here in this room. I was taken out of the room, and I'm up in the sky, and I can only assume phased because it feels like we're phased, meaning my body was there, but I couldn't feel the environment, and we were out in the open, so it's a very like we were on a platform, and there was no effect of the cold air or anything on me. But the main gray alien is there, and I haven't actually interacted with them. The majority of the contact events are all around this traveling, the buildup of the traveling, and then the traveling period, and then like a couple as an adult. And so they were really interested in these kind of more youth era of mine, and then yeah, only a couple as the adult. And so at that point, I hadn't seen them in 8 years, and so they're waking up that portion of my consciousness again, that memory. I'm pretty convinced it's the dual soul, a frequency within the dual soul. So they have an ethereal body of mine, and then they're able to like maybe kick a dial or push a button or something, and then it's opening up that spot. And she's basically saying it's time to open up the memories. And they were aware that what they had done with me had actually caused me trauma, and I actually had complained about it to them at the time. But so they understood a need for resolution, and so she's basically saying this is the time. you now have this opened up to you. And uh, basically, there's a couple other things there, but that's the gist of it. It actually occurred in a contact event. Now, I will not put together the alien stuff at all. It will not happen because I was not an aliens and UFO guy. I was interested in Whitley Strieber's books. I was actually reading Whitley Strieber's books while I was having alien contact, not knowing I was having alien contact. That's how crazy all that is. And then the event that made all this happen, the kind of the rising that happened in 1997, the consciousness thing that made me go traveling, really had me. It was so extreme and so traumatic. I ended up having kind of an internal rebellion. I didn't want to go down the road of weird things anymore. And so there was this kind of like, I followed spirituality, but I was not a person who seeked out new age content, and I wasn't a person. I was following a guru, and I was just into Vedic philosophy, and that was all I focused on. And then I was a musician, and I just focused on living my life and getting a job and all that stuff. So education and all that. So I didn't really think about aliens at all. I was not down this road, and I didn't really want anything to do with aliens. I actually thought crazy stuff. Right, that's basically how I framed it. Though I understood there was a mystery because I'd actually liked Whitley Strieber's books, but at the time there was a lot of weird theories, and a lot of people were running on their theories and making TV shows out of them and stuff. So I wasn't that interested in going down that road. And so it would actually, the memories would be open, but I wouldn't touch them. And all I knew was a discordance was in me, and I couldn't label the discordance. And I could feel something was unresolved. I could feel I had to open something up. I could feel something was going on, and I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know how to touch it. And so at first I thought it was a different job I needed, and then I thought, oh, I'm not playing music again. I was a musician, so maybe I should do that. And nothing was really healing it, and I was kind of at a weird state in my life at the time, where I was unsettled by what careers to be in, and I was depressed at one point. And in my depression, I was contemplating making big changes in my life that would maybe change everything. And at that point, that something started to interact with me. And that thing, um, well, one of the things that ended up happening from the Rising, the 1997 event, was I became, I guess, spiritually sensitive. And yet I didn't really have a way of turning that into something. There was no way to do, or I didn't know what to do with that, what that feeling. I started becoming sensitive to spirits that passed on, loved ones would pass on, or a friend's grandpa would pass on. I'd actually be able to see them or hear them, and interact with them. And I didn't know what to do with that information. It was early in the 90s, and there wasn't really YouTube where you make a show out of that now. I didn't know what to do with that. And it was just a thing that I had, and I didn't actually really like it because I wasn't the type of person to say, I'm in touch with your passed on loved one. I'll tell you what they're saying. I was not that guy. Yeah, I was not that. But I was sensitive to it, and so I was in this space where I was depressed and I was making a change in my life, and something comes into my space, and so I could feel it, and I started yelling out or asking questions out loud, like, "Who's there? What's going on? Who's there?" And I could feel it. Something was there. It sounds kind of crazy. Something was there. And then an image of my guru comes in my head, and I'm like, well, that's really weird. Why would my what? Now my guru is powerful. I've got this Vedic guru, and he's done things that YouTube hosts would dream of being able to do on camera, and that's not his purpose, right? It's all for the purpose of teaching and love and development, and so I thought maybe this is him, and what was going on? I didn't understand, and so I said, "Who are you?" Because it didn't make sense, him sending me an image of my guru and not feeling like my guru. Like it should, I had an idea it should feel like him, but it wasn't him. It was an image. It wasn't just an image. It was a picture, actually, that I was familiar with, like as if it was a photographic picture of him. So that's a really weird thing for a spirit to do, is to send a picture. So I was confused by that. So I said, "What are you?" And it said, "Your dolphin twin." And I was like, what does that mean? And my dolphin twin, and I'm staring at a spot in the living room, and it manifests as a gaseous 4 foot tall image. And I was like, what the hell? And I said, Guruji, if this is you, I'm going to ask you about it. So let me know, because I was like not clear that that's what this was. And then I go back and I tell I actually I didn't ask my guru about it, but I said, hey, this thing happened to me, and he didn't have any knowledge about it. So I was like, okay, something else is in my life going on here. So I didn't know what that was, and there are some events in the traveling periods when I was having having alien contact and not knowing it. I felt like there was a spirit in my life, like an angel was guiding me. That's how I interpreted it at the time, and it was kind of weird. Why does it feel like there's an angel here now? Like, and why isn't this angel helping with my job career, in my job life, and and all this other peripheral things you think you should be guided in? And so I didn't understand that. Now, what happened? Oh, Bob Lazar. So I don't know how I stumbled upon it. It was Jeremy Corbell's documentary on Bob Lazar. And, I'm a grounded guy. I'm a skeptic and myself. And when I saw that documentary, I was like, oh, this is really interesting. It felt grounded. It felt, okay, here you have a guy that, my good judge of character. And it would be very hard to lie about this for 30 years. It really would. And not just that. I mean, now we actually have Lou Elizondo corroborating his information. So, bottom line is that something legitimate was going on there. And for those who really wanted to understand it, there was enough. He'd been talking about the phenomenon enough that you could. So I was very curious about that. And it's the first thing that cracked this open. I decided to watch a YouTube channel on UAPs, at the time UFOs. And it was just people's videos. It wasn't commentary. People would just upload them, and the host, I guess, would just put them up there. And there were weird orbs and weird things. And the truth is about some of these objects is that they really contain a vibe or something. Like you can kind of get it's just really weird, the psychic element to this stuff. And Jacques Vallée has a whole paper on it with Eric Davis, incommensurability, and something to do with the high strangeness, where you actually can have psychic effects from UAP. And these videos did something to me. And I started. Oh, sorry. See, there's so much information with my story. While traveling, I was seeing orbs. So that's the twist to this, right? I was actually, I had a weird event in 1997 that made me go traveling, and then I started seeing objects in the sky. And I just thought that this was spiritual. I had no way of understanding this to be aliens, because they were orbs. They were they would be receptive to my thoughts and my feelings. So I interpreted it as like spirits. I couldn't understand this stuff. So when I'm watching this documentary, this YouTube channel, these orbs come back. And I'm questioning at that period of my life too, what was that travel? What was the 1997 thing about? Because I didn't have any answers for it. I had done all my scriptural research and I'd been into spirituality for long enough, but nothing answered the why behind how extreme that event was and made me go traveling. And why was I hung up on it? What was going on with this? I couldn't figure and resolve this thing. And those orbs came back at the same time I'm questioning, and they look like the objects from when I was traveling. What the hell's going on here? And I started to get really curious about that weird entity that was communicating with me. What the hell was that all about? And then one day it actually said something. So it was able to communicate with me telepathically, and it actually communicated and said, do this thing. Gave me a command. I will eventually learn that command would actually help me unravel this. But at the time I said, only if you show yourself. Boom, and outside my window, an orb flies by. And so I'm freaking out because there's a link that I'm not understanding. What's with the orbs that I saw traveling? What's with this entity talking to me? What is with these? Why is it happening at the same time I'm looking into that period of my life again? What is going on? What's the big picture? And eventually, it's kind of a bit of a story, but I'm meditating one day, and I'm actually contemplating on the 1997 event, the consciousness thing that made me go traveling. And I'm saying, it must have just been this book I read. So I read a book, and it kind of launched this whole experience. And then the voice interjects and says, no, it was our meeting with you when you were a young teenager. And there was an image at the time, there actually was an image of the school field, but I didn't quite put it all together. And but there was a clear words. No, it was our meeting with you with a young teenager. And I knew what that implied, that something up there was telling me it had taken me or interacted with me. And I was jumping to the conclusion of alien abduction, and I didn't like it. And I was actually panicking, and I was like, no, 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 no. And I wouldn't hear it because my head was filled with all of the negative stuff, and it's menacing and interpersonal and all that stuff. And so I finished the meditation, and I went to my shower, And then a memory came up, and I remembered an owl that was in my back in the back of my house growing up as a teenager. And I then quickly, what it feels like is that thing was actually telling me, hey, look at that memory. So I'm kind of like all of a sudden remembering this weird memory. And I remembered it from a long time ago, this owl that I saw. But all of a sudden it started hitting me, wait a minute, but I never saw an owl there. And I'm a nature enthusiast, and I remember practically the first time I saw a cougar and a bear and all these things growing up as a kid. And I don't actually have a memory of seeing an owl there, but do I have a memory of an owl there? And then I quickly put together, I did remember Whitley Strieber talking about owls. And I was like, what is this? And I was getting really nervous. And I started realizing, wait, this is like, what is this? I don't know what this is. And I went back to the location because I knew where that location was. It's about 50 minutes away from where I'm currently living. And when I went back there, I brought that memory up of that owl that wasn't ever there, and I could feel behind it was a feeling that I'd been lured out as a teenager. So there was a distinct two reality thing going on. It was the first time I touched it, my consciousness and my mind. Two realities. One that thought it went one way, a whole event went one way, and another where the event actually did something different. And it was a distinct split of feelings. And it felt that its feelings were a friendly presence lured me out. I would remember eventually, not at that moment, that I actually, when I was 17, I actually got up in the middle of the night and went behind my house in the forest. And I thought I went to just push my boundaries. And it turned out there was a contact event and I didn't know about it. And it actually had been lured out and I didn't know that. And that was the second one after the Afterlife one. So that was the first one, the Afterlife. I call it the first contact event where I saw the Afterlife. This is the second one. And they put a screen memory of an owl that I'd never seen. And it cracks the entire thing. It basically cracks it open. And what ends up happening are flashbacks. So I didn't go to hypnotic regression. I didn't make this up. I actually started having the flashbacks first of seeing these events. And it took about months because I actually was scared at first. I'm not an aliens and UFO guy. And this is more popular than it has ever been. And at the time it wasn't. And I wasn't really interested in becoming an aliens and UFO guy. I was a banker. I have an MBA. I have this kind of background, and I have professionals that surround me in my life, actually. And who and why? Like, I wouldn't, this is not my nature to do that. But I couldn't deny it because it had affected me so much, especially the trauma around the event that happened to me in 1997. It was so personal, I needed to understand it. So I kind of was wishy-washy at first. And then as the more the memories were there, you're more like, okay, what happened to me? I need to know this. And I could feel the memories were teenage moments. They're my teenage years lodged in these memories on crafts. So uh, yeah, that's it. They're embedded with who I was. All the emotions of that teenage years. So those moments when I'm 16, I'm actually containing the memories and the thoughts of the feelings of being that 16-year-old who's discovering life and still insecure about school and everything, and he's on craft, and that's what embeds those memories. And so these events so much happen to me that I can't escape them. And what's happened is that the researchers who go down this rabbit hole say, yeah, this is the phenomenon we know can interact with these ways. And this is so detailed and complex. It sounds it would be impossible. I actually yell, statistically, it would be impossible to create something so detailed. And that's what it is, because it interacted with my life in this very, very detailed way. And every contact event affected me and changed me. And there's evidence for something weird happening in every moment of those contact events. So it's like that. That's how the whole thing cracked open.
Are all of your contact experiences screen memories?
Yeah. So, okay, all of them, all the contact events were obscured memories. All of them are. Yeah. The present stuff, it's like there's no need for the contact anymore, or not the physical contact events. I see that entity, that orb has not left, and I have some videos on my YouTube channel, and I communicate now with that thing. And so, yeah, and that thing kind of guides this process. So that's very interesting. And I don't I don't need to go back on craft unless they desire that kind of event. The whole thing that happened to me was quite large, though feels amazing to be on craft. I'm communicating quite regularly with it, and I do see in bizarre things, and some of those things I can get on film. And so that's the contact I have now. But all those contact events were obscured memories. And some of those memories are flashbacks fully. Some of them were broken up, and I had to require the help of hypnotic regression to put together. But I've actually written several essays on it. Like the reality is, you have these broken memories, and then you get into a hypnotic regression, and then all of a sudden you're saying, oh, here's another thing, like part of the evidence for myself, right? And there was a regressionist who was involved with this. So everything happened out in nature, everything. Also unique, because a lot of people have bedtime contact events, and I don't have that. Though when they're the older adult ones will be them taking me from the bed. It's not like they were in my physical room. It's as if maybe they pulled me out or something. But all those teenage and traveling years, I'm all out in physical nature. Well, what happens is I forget this guy forgets the locations. You just forget this stuff. You forget the hyper details. And there is pretty good memory research now on the hippocampus, the part of you that retains long-term memory. That if you crack open a memory, you can open up it has a geotag associated with it. Well, one of the biggest things that I started noticing was that I would have these broken memories, and then I would do a hypnotic regression to understand where it was, and I would have details about the physical environment that this guy never retained. So in one case, I'm on a hike. I'm walking up a hike on my fifth contact event. And as I'm walking up, I'm under the power lines and I get taken. Well, man, I don't remember power lines are on that hike all these 20 years later. And in the hypnotic regression, there's power lines. And of course, I just go back and I do my research. I'm like, oh my God, there's power lines. And there's
Wow.
actually power lines on that hike. And not just that, I physically go back because I'm investigating and I can feel it happen to me. All of a sudden, I'm rushed with those emotions and feelings of that very, very event. So everything is embedded in the physical locations it happened in. And that's just another element of how real this all was for me and for my brain. So yeah, it's interesting. I actually challenge people to try and debunk me because there's so much erroneous stuff going on here that you can't deny it statistically. Now, it couldn't sound bat insanity, and I get that, but it is so matching up with the phenomenon that it's hard to square it. But I can relate to, or at least understand, people's apprehension to believe it. But I've done all my homework. That's the whole thing.
I have questions about the Greys.
Yeah,
If they have the ability to make you feel this love and this bliss,
yeah,
and they can communicate telepathically and they can manipulate physical reality, why do some contactees feel fear and
yeah,
trauma if they are these benevolent spiritual beings
yeah,
that you've experienced?
yeah. This is a great question. I actually love it because it's actually saying something about the human species. So let's go with the fear first. Trauma is actually something else with experience, but let's talk about the fear. I know several experiencers, contactees, and the only fear is the presence of the alien. They'll say something was in the corner, and I could feel it was the darkest and evilest entity I'd ever seen in my life. Well, what did it do to you? It just sat there. What are you talking about? So it was dark, evil, and I've had several like that. It freaks them out, and I've had that right on that field. I'm freaked out. And what's really going on here? So, you ever notice that people are scared of ghosts? But what's a ghost? What's really a ghost? Right? You have to think that through for a second. What's really happening? What's the fear response? What actually is going on? What's the actual fear response behind a ghost? Right? What's really happening is we live out this life, and there's not enough science behind it. But humans are projection machines, right? We have an internal frame of reference about how we feel about our world, and then that projects outwards, and our world can materialize that way. But we can also place our emotions onto things, right? So we can say, someone cuts us off, and we can think that they're so mean, that person cut us off, and you don't realize they were just unconscious, right? And they're actually a kind person, right? And so we internalize so much, and then we project it out. And there's some evidence with gaze research. I really love, or Dr. Rupert Sheldrake has done gaze research. And what's gaze research, right? Is the idea that someone can pick up when they're being watched. Well, that would mean that there's actually a projection element going on. And same with, quantum, never mind the double slit experiment, which really does seem to say something about gaze, that there's something happening here. So there's a projection element that occurs. Well, if this entity is actually up here, and you've never opened that door in your life, you've never opened the door of up there. Let's say it's the afterlife. Let's say it's such high something else. And yeah, it simultaneously looks ugly physically. So it is weird to look at. Then you're going to have a shock response from its dimensional state, because it's poking that state in you. So you don't have that thing you've ever looked at. It's going to crack it open in you. And you don't like looking at that part of yourself, or you're uncomfortable, or it nudges some old childhood thing, or it nudges this abuse you might have had growing up, or it nudges this thing because it's poking at your consciousness, you'll reject it outright. You'll actually spit it back out as something awful. And you won't even quite understand why it's awful. You'll say, it made me feel horrible. And you're like, what did it do? It just sat there looking at me, making me feel awful. Like, so what? I don't quite understand that. And you go down the rabbit hole of ghosts. And that's what ghosts are, right? Ghosts are actually putting into your frame of reference that you are not a physical tissue body, but you're also an energy form. And when you're uncomfortable with that, you get scared of the ghost, because the ghost is actually pushing that in the consciousness of the individual. So you're projecting that fear out of yourself. Right? So humans are a projection machine, and we're projecting that fear out. Now, I think the idea is too, the entities are uncomfortable looking. They are. And so you kind of match that up together, and it can really be ultra repulsive. And I think it's not just the physical. The entities are dimensional spirit entities, meaning they walk into a room and the room alters in vibration. So this is like a big body type of thing, not just the physical thing that you're looking at. This is the whole environment will change, and the entire experience can turn into awfulness when you aren't into that spot of yourself. It will turn into a shock response, and it's because it's so overwhelming, it's so powerful, it's so big. Not just that too. I've said this several times. People do not understand how powerful these entities are. So then you have to trust them, and it's the same feeling as you ever capture a bird in your house, right? The bird is
Yeah.
flew in. Yeah, that feeling,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's terrified,
Yep.
right? And then you capture it, it has to surrender. And I know the feeling of that surrender, because that's the feeling of the aliens. You could snap its neck, right? It has to trust you that you're not going to snap its neck and just wipe it out in a single moment. It has to trust you. So it's frozen in terror. And that's what happens here. They're so powerful, this encompassing environmental field of the aliens too, that they could just freeze you in time. They could pull you out of your soul, out of your body. They could do something extreme to you. That kind of extreme feeling of how powerful they are also is actually very shocking for humans. And I've actually said this in several forums, like, dude, just wait till you realize how that they can stop time, they can change space. It's too powerful for the human mind that if you don't trust them, you're going to assume that there has to be some negative intention somewhere. So that plays into that kind of feeling of being in the presence of something so powerful. And so there's a trust element, there's a projection element, and I think it doesn't help too, the physical element too, that they kind of do look off-putting to the human mind. So that all adds into the fear response. And so I actually think they are compassionate in the sense that they work with that. They obstruct faces, right? They do in telepathic and when you're interacting with them, they can cover up the face to not shock the human. Jim Sparks has contact events where they were covering up the faces. They did that with me too. So they're purposely trying to obscure faces so you're not shocked by them. Part of the reason there's not disclosure, I'm certain, is the very reason that we can get shocked by the kind of the dimensional energy of them, the kind of state that they are in. If you're in a human who loves your 3D, I don't want to say your 3D world, but you're into your dramas, that kind of thing, and you love the drama world, I guess, then this will be very off-putting in your feelings. You won't like the way it feels. It will shock you. So then they don't interact with those people. Right? I think there's things like that going on that are part and parcel of this. And I always feel like it's a translation of dimensions that are the real issues. And I think the best way to look at some of this stuff is how we handle animals. Right? We will handle a bear. We will have to tranquilize that bear, and the bear will be. We can't communicate to that thing, right? We can't explain exactly why we're doing what we're doing to it. We can't explain to it why we're tranquilizing it, why it might have a virus that we have to help it deal with. There's no communication ever that we can do. And the same thing is happening here with the entities who are on this other level, can't explain everything to us that we don't even comprehend or understand. Never mind, not just their presence or maybe the way they're framing reality, but this dimensional effect that it has on humans while they're interacting with people as well too. So I think all of this plays a part in that element, the fear. The trauma part is very interesting because they also gave me trauma too. And I have a bit of a theory behind this. Now, so in Michael Talbot's book, The Holographic Universe, having done extensive near-death experience research and hypnotic regression, between life regression research, he came up with two fundamental theories, two fundamental truths about the afterlife and what the being of light people witness want from humans. Knowledge, self-growth, knowledge, self-growth. So the afterlife, this physics, this isn't hokey spirituality, woohoo stuff. This is a physics, this is a reality that people are experiencing. And the higher self, this entity, or whatever this is, wants you to learn to self-develop. It doesn't care that you invent the iPhone for everybody. It doesn't care that you invent a car or a better bike or a better whatever. It wants you to self-develop so you can self-grow. That's one. And the second is to love more. Well, the entities that I know knew my life plan, and then they caused trauma. Now, they didn't seem to cause trauma, like as in they wanted to cause trauma, but I had a response back to what they did. And I can't help separate an event like this with anyone else's events in their lives. People have a broken leg and they can't run properly anymore. So they have to now choose a career in an office. So that shapes their life. You could blame the person who broke your leg or the reason you broke your leg, and you can yell at them and say you're a victim. Or you could learn to grow from it and learn to self-develop and say, okay, I have to change my life and be creative here. And then what you end up learning 5 or 10 years later was that was the best choice for me, because now I made this other choice and I feel better about my life. And there's something that actually fundamentally, that's what my story is. The aliens prove it to me. And that's partially why I speak publicly and I think my stuff is important. They show me that they're aware of that level. So it's the level of the duality. We're going to give him something so extremely amazing and positive, and we simultaneously give him, or he'll struggle through the opposite. We won't give it to him, but his mind or his duality, your physical tissue brain, is learning how to manage it, and you might get lost, and we can't help you with that. And that's what ends up happening. I end up fighting with them. And all these years later, they actually send me, they actually help they help me line up my timeline. So I end up with my partner and my guru. They actually brought the ones who brought me there. And it's this kind of interesting layout of give him something amazing. Then there will be trauma to that we're not causing that trauma, but we are definitely, they kind of gave the keys to that trauma, but my mind actually is what did the rest. And I'm the one trying to make sense of things. And they're saying that's part of the plan. Like, you have to figure that part out. And there's no doubt now that self-growth was a part of that. Not even just aliens giving me self-growth, but the type of mind that formed from that trauma was a trauma that's looking at consciousness all the time. That's trying to understand spirit, trying to understand its relationship to God. And it's sucked in the moment, because all physical duality stuff does. It's suffering, like the Buddha would go into. It's suffering. But right, there's always the Veda version of this, which is that Brahma is actually your higher Atma is actually the part of this parcel, and it wants this growth. My own higher self put me into the concentration camps. Right, it's the one who said that's going to be your life, guy. I'm sorry, and didn't even say sorry probably. So that's the level that they're on. And so there is this weird twist because you're actually getting a lot of positivity coming out from the research too. A lot. The free research is a really good one, but listen, I've been public for 5 years and no one has ever come to me and said, no, man, you got it wrong. They were just devils with me and they did this and this and this. And here's all the proof for that. And no one's come to me with that. All I get are experiencers who say, I've had an experience like you've had, and then they'll share with me how the aliens were actually very benevolent or they're like angels for them, or they're spirit entities for them, or and they're spirit guides for them. That's all I'm getting. I'm not getting any of the pushback. The pushback comes from people who haven't had contact and have absorbed information from researchers. They've absorbed information from people trying to make sense of the phenomenon, and so they've kind of lent towards more of a darker turn. But I'm not meeting those people, and so they're not reaching out to me. And I encourage now. I'm at the point where I'm saying, bring it on. I don't want to cause trauma on anybody, but I am understanding why there's hardship, but at the same time, I've been proven the level that they're thinking on and the awareness that they have. And we need to expect that they will not be thinking like humans and they won't be aware of human, or they don't care about maybe some human emotional issues, but they are interested in your growth, just like they would be if they were from the afterlife. So that's kind of the big picture stuff I give for the hardship. And I understand and can relate to those things. But I have had my own process of how I moved through it.
I just want to push back a little bit just because there is the other conversation from the doomers who don't understand because they haven't had these, or they have had these experience from entities and they've read into it from their own interpretation. Because if there's darkness and there's light, right? So there's beings of the dark and there's beings of the light. And some might say, well, these could be trickster beings that are manipulating you and pushing you and trying to gain your trust to push their agenda. What would you say to those people?
Yeah, there is no dark. That's what I say. If you're going to go down the avenue that there's dark, then don't deal with aliens and attack sharks. Dude, have you ever seen what a shark does to a human? What about a wolf? It mutilates a baby deer. If you're going to go down the avenue of what's dark here, and what about, how could you ever believe in God? Because a meteor will smack into a planet and wipe out millions of life forms. So darkness is all around you then. And what about just looking in the mirror and looking about all the humans who mutilate other humans? I just saw something awful in the paper and there's 5 decapitated heads in Mexico. So why are you dealing with aliens? Don't deal with aliens and figure out your crap about what's all dark and what's not dark. Because the reality is that all there is existence. And there isn't dark. These are all concepts, fragments, ideas in the brain. And it's because the human is stuck in a structure of mental mind. We're in a mental matrix that we create on our own. And then you're the one saying dark, good, dark, good, dark, good. And what you're doing is you're labeling the dark inside yourself and you're labeling the good inside yourself. But you can't exceed any further when you're labeling these things. You literally have to let go of the labels. And an example of this is that maybe I've interacted with an entity someone would call dark, but that entity is never dark to me. And that entity's never harmed me. And in fact, some of them don't like humans, but the entity was never harmful to me. And I mean psychically, these kind of astral things that people might be doing. I've had my own experiences. And especially with like things like lizards and stuff. And those entities didn't harm me because I respected them, because I saw them for what they really are, right? So this whole dark thing is a conjure up of the human mind, and you have to get past it. And the gray aliens are not in the realm of caring about your dark and light, because that's the level that they're on. They're on these above or these higher levels about this stuff. Now, it doesn't mean there's other intentions. I'm not going to doubt that, but the humans have that too, and everyone's kind of got their game going on. But if you're connected with source, and that's what you focus on, that's the thing. I don't focus on getting my energy from other things. I focus on myself. I focus on consciousness and God. And so I have practices, I have Veda and meditations, and I focus on my higher self and finding God in my life. I do these interviews and I do my stuff and I go work and I have a whole practice where I focus on myself. I focus on God and development and getting closer and closer. And that's my power. And I think and you can only do that when you're not even conscious of good or bad, dark or light. These are dualities, and the realm of the absolute, where some of these entities are coming from, have nothing to do with dark or light, and yet those are just human constructs. So It doesn't mean people can't, again, you can't have bad experiences, because as I said, that is, you can, but again, that's part of the duality aspect. We're labeling that. We're using our mental mind frame construct and saying, that's this, that has to fit in my universe that way, that fits in my universe that way. And that's all that is. You have to take a step back and recognize your own thought forms and let them go. And that's practice. That's what a meditation does. You have to learn to live in a stillness where you're not creating thoughts about these issues. And so the other trickster thing is really interesting too, because if you pull back from any type of malevolent behavior, my entity, who I'm regularly in contact with, loves to play with me. So she does play. So it's I don't think of it as trickster as much as she knows I have a limited perception, and so she plays off of it. So she'll do weird games. Right? I'll watch an orb, literally an orb. I'm watching it's red, red. There's a building right in front of me. It goes through, it goes behind the building, but it comes out on top of the building. So it's like what did it do? Like, so it's like
Yeah.
playing with my perceptions all the time. And I have caught her telepathically laughing, like ha ha ha, not laughing at me, but laughing with me. And there's a weird sense of like, and I've kind of said it's kind of like I'm the dog and she's the human, and she's like, no, 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 you're not like that. It's not these scales of level, but she does enjoy playing on the perceptions, and it isn't trickster to the point where your life is a trickster. That's not, I never experienced that, but I definitely experienced the kind of the joke, the love of interacting with and then having some fun with things. My entity definitely loves to do that, but there is a respect. That's the difference. And if you don't know that they have the ability to respect, then I think you're going to be on guard about a lot of it. But my entity definitely respects my space, respects my privacy, respects my respects my development. There's some degrees where she won't interfere with things, and I have to figure things out on my own. So it's a complex game, and I think that we have to learn. The bottom line just always comes back to the self. We have to learn to not. We have to do this as a human, not judge each other. And if we're seeing darkness on the screen, you call it darkness. Either you learn to figure out a way to say, okay, whoa, that's growth, or you just remove that from your sphere. Stop watching that TV show or stop watching that social media thing, because if you soak yourself into it, you're gonna have trouble trying to get yourself out of this frame of reference where you're saying how awful that is, how awful that is. But we do need to find a sense of peace, and that peace comes from not creating these having removing judgments and assumptions and expectations out of the frame of reference of our mind, and allowing ourselves to just exist, and then what things around us exist, letting them just exist. And you'll find when you remove your mental structure from things, then you'll see clearly what they actually are. And that's the state that I try to get in with all this stuff.
Yeah, where attention goes, energy flows. So if you're focusing on the negative, it like creates this momentum. And yeah, I get that. I'm still trying to understand because I'm also like on Reddit and I'm reading the doomers and I'm like, I get where you're coming from. And, like there's this whole view is like, well, we want to be prepared. There's nothing wrong for, to prepare for a hurricane. It, might not hit you, but like, it's okay to be prepared. And I get that. I get that perspective, but I just really wanted to hear where you were coming from and your experience, your personal experience, because I think there's something to be said about that. Um, you have also said that that these beings in their corporal form can be like angels, they can be like Mother Mary,
Yeah,
um,
that's right.
and but in our physical 3D reality, they appear as gray aliens. I mean, that's a label you're giving them, I guess, is a
Right.
gray
That's true.
alien. Could there be different species of what people are thinking these are gray aliens, and you're experiencing this other species of beings that are different? They might have gray skin. What do they look like to you? I guess let's start
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. So okay. Okay, so there's several questions. Okay, the first one is
Yeah.
there multiple species. So um, now I actually do interact with several versions of them. Yes, so talls. So I have a small, like a 4 foot, 4.5 foot tall entity that I interact with. Now she has a bizarre look. Um, she has she has like a bone structure, like a longer chin. and then the slit. And so I've actually drawn her picture out several times, and she has these kind of down angled oval eyes, and then she has an ethereal. She has like an ethereal, a cone, like a elongated cone. Actually, is what it is, and it's a strange look. And she oozes some kind of elder, like chiefdom or someone important in her society. So I don't. She's given me in some telepathy what that stuff is, and but it still isn't fully making sense to me. But the bottom line is that yeah, there's this. That's what she looks like, and she has kind of the greenish gray skin, and it is kind of leathery. Yeah, it has a kind of I don't know leathery kind of a look to it. Um, I'll interact with her. I'll interact with the tall medical greys as well too, and so they're actually tall, human, actually taller than a human. I'll interact with them several times, more than once. I'll interact with humanoids as well too. So and I don't know that I'm dealing with different humanoids from different places. Unfortunately, the locations of where all these things are coming from aren't really revealed to me, except for the elder. I'll end up learning she does live in a community in a city, and I'll end up going there, and it's on Venus, some kind of dimensionally phased state in Venus. I don't quite understand it, but she is in a community there in a city, and in that city I saw humanoids, and I saw what the entity I assume to be the mantis beings. So there is this other higher arching seem to be controllers or leaders, and they seem to be running maybe the kind of more show about what they're doing, what the species is doing with humans, and so that's the kind of more mantis looking creature, and and then there are occasionally I'll interact with some other types of grays who look more like that skinny bob gray. There's a video out there called Skinny Bob, and I do have a childhood contact event that kind of resembles that. So there are other types of grays. So there are other species. I am aware of that. Are there other agendas? Maybe. I think sometimes that I really just I really want to drill home the type of person that they're interacting with, and 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 to not leave behind an idea that there is a greater reason for that interaction. An example to this is let's look at Carla Turner. I never read Carla Turner's book, but she was one of the first to really paint a negative picture of contact. And it's because she was Christian, right? She was Christian, and then she had paranormal hauntings a lot that were combined with this. But maybe the entities knew something. I'm not saying they did, but maybe they knew that by revealing this part of themselves to her, A, she has an growth of opportunity. It doesn't matter what she's going to do. She'll be so moved by it, she'll communicate it and write a story about it and put it into books. I'm not saying that, but so there might be a thing where they're working off of her fear, right? Like we have to start. That's it. We have to start going up to the higher level about the objective perspective about what they're doing with individuals. That's what I'm saying. The species, some of the researchers, Grant Cameron gets this. He calls it reflective, that the actual entities kind of reflect back things about the human. So if you believe in Jesus, you might see Jesus on a craft, and that's been recorded too, right? So, and it's reflective, which is kind of also how the paranormal responds. If you look at how ghosts and things interact with people, they can reflect back what the person is thinking or what the person is experiencing. And so there is a dimensional kind of paranormal thing that goes on with this. And the only way to see that is to not be absorbed in it and call it haunted, but to actually take a step up and say objectively, okay, what could be going on that's bigger here? And you have to say it's bigger. You have to, because we're dealing with dimensional. So you're dealing clearly with something that doesn't interact with physical tissue brain. David Grush, if you don't believe me, use David Grush then. Dimensional, those are his words now. And he's convincing senators to say that. So then you can't use the human brain. You have to just stop now. You have to stop saying bad, evil. You can't even say angel. That's the other twist too, right? I was saying that because I'm using it subjectively. It comes off that way. I'm not saying she was Mother Mary, right? But I'm understanding that she's specifically hitting an archetype in my own mind that's making me feel that way because I'm not even religious or spiritual or have a Bible, right? Well, I do have a Bible because I love studying this stuff, but I don't worship the Bible. And so I don't have a part of my own psyche that would say Mother Mary, but I definitely felt it from her. So what's going on there? So there's a definitely an archetype that's hitting in my own subconscious that she's wanting to touch. So that's fascinating. So I objectively look at that and say, wow, that's fascinating what she's doing there. I don't go around thinking she's Mother Mary now, right? So we have to. the phenomenon is forcing us to look objectively at what this is. Here's the other twist: if they were so dark, evil and demonic, then they would actually cut humans up and slice them up and then give you back to society and not care, right? They're so powerful they
Yeah.
could do things that are just objectively extreme, and they don't do any of it. And yet we know things like cattle mutilations exist, by the way, with cattle that we would have mutilated, right? There's a twist here, right? Again, if you're looking at timelines and they might have a bigger picture about things, they might be acting in ways with which they knew that things were going to happen. So they put things into karma, they put things into timelines. Anyway, those are bigger picture. But I lean towards this. This is what my entire story is if they are in the afterlife, then they're on the level of the higher self. And the higher self is the one who put you into trauma. The higher self is the one who put you into that birth scenario. The higher self is the one who put you there. And you're there to learn, to grow, to develop, and to love. What does that mean? It means learning to forgive, learning to care, learning to love, even when our situations are hard, right? And I know that sounds hard, is kind of what they say. And yet simultaneously, that's what we're here to do, is to figure that part out. And I'm not seeing any difference. I'm not seeing the aliens interact any differently. And in fact, when they do, when a human opens up to interacting with them, you see a lot more benevolence. You see a lot more growth. They might be pushy, but in the end, their human grows and there's a consciousness expansion. They end up being psychic, or they end up having mediumship abilities. So they end up having an expansion of consciousness, and that's also highly documented.
Yeah, that resonated with me for sure. Um,
Great questions, by the way. I really enjoy it, and I have no qualm getting into it, and I'm never going to put down anybody's experiences. I know them to be real, but we do have to look at what's going on objectively, and that's it. And I argue that point, and it doesn't mean that I'm not trying to unvalidate anyone's terror or traumas.
you've said that there's a planetary event, a big shakeup that will change the course of humanity.
Right?
Um, what does that look like, and when do you think that will occur?
Yeah, the when. I don't have any timelines. I'm not someone who was given a timeline. Um, but I am of the belief, largely because of the belief of like John Ramirez. John Ramirez is the one who I kind of lean towards this, and he leaned towards 2027. So I have a video of his, and he says it clearly. Internally, they know the entities are showing up. Now they've always been here, but they might be making themselves present, and that actually what this was a 10-year soft disclosure process starting in 2017 and ending in 2027. That makes a lot of sense to me. Why? Because I know the reason the entities are involving themselves with us. Whatever dimension they're coming from, it interpenetrates with our own. We are affecting them. We're affecting their world. And they are intelligent, maybe more intelligent than we are. And they're doing things in other dimensions and other spaces and possibly in others and space in other places, in other ways. So they need this world, and they're not letting us destroy it. And I think that's part of the hybrid program, and that's part of all this kind of intermingling stuff, this merging that they plan to do. The So I don't know what that is, the 2027. I actually am of the mind and pretty convinced that it depends on how humans play it, right? That if we turn into a grand uprising, something has to happen. If we say, let's embrace our space brothers, then that may actually turn into a whole other type of interaction. And I think the human mind is actually the problem again. How we handle this, and I'm certain that's actually in the part. So I don't know that there actually is a timeline as much as something will happen. I believe it to be 2027, and then we still might. It doesn't mean that we'll be walking around with aliens at that point. That there might actually still be them being standoffish, but we're aware of them now, and now the entire population is knowing about them, and we have to start making choices about what we do with them, and how we handle their presence on our planet. So I think that's the crux. What's the end result? What I'm told, what I'm shown, is it utopia? Yeah, yeah. I think it's utopia. I think that we can't handle their world in our present structure. I'm not an anti-capitalist. I actually I understand that how beneficial capitalism was. I have an MBA, So I studied economics, and I really actually enjoyed it. And I worked in the bank, so I actually very much understand capitalism. But there are some research. There's enough research on capitalism, and we understand it doesn't do what it was designed to do, which is to give everything to everybody. So we know that now. We have enough research, and there's statistical research and tons of academic studies on capitalism. Yeah, and we now get it that it's missing parts of the structure that we need. So meaning you'll always have poor people, or you always find ways to create environmental degradation, or you always have rich people and poor people, and we can't get rid of that system. So then something isn't working. How do we? And especially now that we're going to start creating more problems, that stability of what capitalism was could actually really fracture, and maybe it is already fracturing. So that system can't handle what they need to bring to us to create stability on our planet, environmental stability, which is important to them because we're intermingling with their dimension. So we can't handle that tech, right? We can't handle the non-corruption tech. Let's think about that. Imagine you have a technology where you can see everyone's behaviors. You can just go in and look at anybody. Nothing is kept from you. On a hologram device like I saw in my past life, you can see anybody's life. So no one can lie to you anymore. No corruption can exist anymore. But that can't exist. It fundamentally can't exist without causing so much disruption. Right? Never mind, how do you get a device like that into everyone's homes? So things like that are actually the problem with these kind of big picture stuff. So there is a kind of like an idea of a reset or some kind of version of that to allow this new thing to come in, which is what the hybrids are designed to do. And yeah, it is with their tech, the issues of survival aren't issues anymore. And the idea that they need humans to upgrade into a dimensional state, so you could start interacting with what they interact with, which is dimensional places, and they end up doing scientific work in dimensional states, and being a part of a society like that. And if you don't want to, I'm not saying that that's a forced thing. It's also farming and farming. Like I've seen someone remote view, and there was alien presences on the planet, and a lot of farming was actually on the planet. And I think that it's a lot more holistic, and I think that it's a lot more. It's utopia, but it's kind of really. It's unfortunate to say that because we have lofty ideas about that. But I think that it's an idea. It's a state where the elder called it to me the unveiling, the great unveiling, and it's the great unveiling about you, about us, that you're a entity that has been living thousands of years in the birth and death life cycle, and that you have access to your own higher self, and that you are this multifaceted thing. So by knowing that, why would you put the world in the state that it's in now? That's what it is. So once you have the awareness that you actually are this long living thing, that you will die, but you actually just rebirth, and we have tech that can help you make all these transitions a bit smoother. You're going to start doing everything consciously about your future, and it's stuff like that that is so big, big, big picture that we need a new type of world. And I think that they were trying to help with that. I think that's probably somewhere this government stuff was coming in, and the government was pushing back, kind of because it is paranormal and scary, and so they kind of get freaked out by some of this stuff. And I think that those type of transitions that are actually that's been the big problem. But that's the end result that I'm aware of, because that's the state that they're in.
I'm so curious. Yes, I've heard the 2027, Chris Bledsoe 2026.
Mm-hmm.
Lou Elizondo recently said time is not a luxury we can afford.
That's right.
And I'm just wondering what that's going to look like, and what everyone's got their own messages. I've talked to some near-death experiencers, psychics, and they've had their own experiences with a date somewhere around there as well. It's really interesting. I'm ready for a change. I'm so ready for a change.
Yeah. I think expect something like this. I think all of this would have gone differently had we been a society that didn't eradicate the indigenous mind frame. So imagine a world where we actually preserved our elders, and we had spiritual elders. And so you can almost imagine a scenario, a painting, if you will, of an indigenous tribe, open arms as a UFO comes down, right, embracing the Space Brothers. But instead, we had the military-industrial complex take over, right? and which is just, we have to have compassion. That's the normal state. That's the state we're living in. That's the world we're living in. But that indigenous thing could have actually made that transition smoother. We could have actually embraced that transition. I'm actually also convinced the entities themselves sharing some of our DNA, right, having some kind of version where they are from an Earth of some kind that is similar, or some kind of planet that's like ours, that they maybe respect, or the indigenous thing is embedded in them too. That I met an elder, like I call her the elder, and you might sometimes, and I've heard someone say this, that they think, like, you can think of us as cosmic shamans, right? So that there is this kind of indigenous thing going on here, and I'm certain this is what they want to do. The lowly spiritual people, right, in our society, click them up and start getting them to say, "You run the world now." So you actually, it's a flip, and I'm certain that they want to be flip. They want to help with this transition by getting the human species who've been already doing spiritual work to be flipping up. So now they're helping with the building of society and running of the world. And this is the stuff I'm. They haven't said that directly to me, but I'm pretty certain, with my own involvement and having a guru, that this is their type of stuff. And if you really watch and you notice, Betty and Barney Hill were churchgoers. Betty and Dreesen believed in Jesus, right? Chris Bledsoe, one of the biggest, is Christian, right? If he's not, I don't think he's Catholic, but he's definitely
No.
Christian. Yeah, and
Yeah.
so you got the spiritual mind frame is always very interesting to them. This is what the researcher always tries to rub out from the whole evidence, but this is the fact with me, right? They chose me because I had a guru, and I could translate what they did with me, the afterlife stuff. Once I they helped that helped the process. I couldn't have been given that information or that stuff, that experiences, if I didn't have a guru to help me hold some of this stuff. That's what it is. Hold it. Get rid of the ego mind and start holding kind of more stuff in your heart, and more dimensional stuff in your being. And so that plays a part. And I know the entities are something like that's going to happen, a flip. And so that's what I can say, that eventually, and I'm certain it's in our lifetime. I am now so certain it's in our lifetime. Yeah. So we just have to see. There might be a bit of a hiccup or a transition, and that transition, I don't know if it's going to get uglier. It could, and I think we have to just have our vision set for the future, that we know this resolves itself in a positive, highly positive way for humanity.
I think the best thing that we can do to prepare is just to prepare ourselves and
Yeah.
to really ground ourselves and focus on love.
Yeah.
And yeah, um,
That's it. I believe everything you're saying, and that is it. Like, and the other thing Lou Elizondo says, he says that it's right, and the other thing he hints at is, don't worry about this. Go love your family, right? Go be with your family. Spend time with your loved
mm,
ones. And that's part of the picture, right? Like, you're not going to find the answers to the universe learning about the alien agenda. You're actually going to find the answer to the universe in the ones you love. And it's really
yes,
about coming back to, that's what matters. And it
coming back
matters
to
in
center.
coming back to center, coming back to source, coming back to your consciousness. Yeah,
They encouraged you to write a book.
that's
Do
right.
you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. My book is The Rising, and the alien plan to build an enlightened city on Earth. And yeah, in 2016, when they opened those memories up, it was an instruction to write everything else, everything I'd experienced with them out into a book. And so that's what this is. It's 26 contact events. Starting, the first one is the one we delved into, where I saw the afterlife. That's how the book starts. Though there are childhood contact events, I don't delve into them, but I explore everything else. And Susie Hansen, author of the Dual Soul Connection, the Alien Agenda for Human Advancement, also with alien contact experiences much similar to my own, helped me write the book. She was the editor, so it gets great reviews. I'm so eternally grateful. People really do like reading the book. I think it can be challenging because it does address some of the hard issues that humans have to face, I think, when disclosure is here. But it also encompasses the enlightenment or the spiritual consciousness development side of them, and I think that's really important for this time. So, yeah, that's what the book is about.
Do you have any final messages for the audience?
Always, I come down to this: um, the entire picture, the entire thing. God is real. The universal field is alive, it's self-conscious. The individual human is an aspect of that, meaning you're God. Every one of us is God. We're all part of the God field. And I think that's part of the big picture here. The higher self is unified in it, and we're all trying to bring in our higher selves. And so find out, if you don't know what that means, find out what it means in life. I think that's where some of this, the answers to the phenomenon, lies within the God self.
What a beautiful ending. Thank you so much, Jeff. It's been a pleasure. I had an amazing time with you.
You got it. Thank you for having me on. Thanks for asking the hard questions. I actually really like them, so I really appreciate that.
I appreciate you. All right.
Yeah. Thanks,
Take
David.
care. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means the world to me, and I will see you in the next video.